And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from a real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 116. This is the Week 13 recap episode. We're going to break down this remarkable game that the Bengals won in Baltimore against the Ravens to improve to 4-8 and break their 4-game losing streak that they've been on. And this also improves their record in the AFC North to 3-1 on the season. They've only got 4 victories, but 3 of them are against divisional opponents, which could potentially be a tiebreaker if the Bengals are able to go on one of their traditional runs to the end of the season when they've already got 8 losses. This is going to, of course, start off all the discussion and excitement about, oh, this is just where they were last year. They were 4-8 at this time last year. And then they won 5 games in a row and didn't make it to the playoffs. But it was a fun ride while it lasted. So before we have to subject ourselves to weeks and months more agony leading up to the playoffs, let's just savor this one game that they won in Baltimore on Thanksgiving night in front of the whole country and the whole world watching. If they were watching NFL football, they were watching this game. And Bengals won 32-14, mostly on the back of, it was a whole team victory. I know the fact that Joe Burrow came back for this first game, he's going to get a lot of the attention, and rightfully so, but really, this game was won mostly by the defense, forcing the Ravens to commit 5 turnovers. This was kind of like the opposite of that Minnesota Vikings game that the Bengals played in Minnesota earlier this year, where they committed 5 turnovers themselves, including 2 defensive touchdowns for the Vikings, and lost with a franchise record margin of 38 points, 48-10. Bengals won the turnover margin 5-1. They did have 1 turnover of their own late in the game, but getting 5 turnovers, they on defense did not score somehow off of all 5 of those turnovers. And actually, there was even one of those turnovers, they gave the ball back to the Bengals the Bengals offense inside the 5-yard line with goal to go, and the Bengals didn't score any points. They tried to go for it on 4th and goal, didn't get it, gave it back to the Ravens with no points scored at all. So it was an odd game for the Bengals in the fact that they got 5 turnovers defensively, but at the same time, they only converted 2 touchdowns. They were 0 for 4 to start off in the red zone, and they had to kick 6 field goals. Evan McPherson made all of those field goals, which was great, but especially early in the first half, the Bengals defense forced 3 turnovers, but by halftime, the Bengals were only able to manage to score on 4 field goals. So it was 12-7 at halftime. The Ravens came out to begin the game on their opening drive. They scored a touchdown with a long run by Derrick Henry, bust things open. It's like, oh gosh, here we go. The Bengals defense is going to be terrible, as they have been all season against the run. And I think the Bengals started off the game to score on their opening drive, but they got stopped with a field goal. So it went 3-7. Let me go back and look at the scoring. Yeah, I got that backwards. Sorry. So the Bengals opened up the game with a 10-play, 50-yard drive, got deep into the red zone, into Baltimore territory, but they couldn't score the touchdown. They got the field goal, and Ravens responded to go up 7-3 with their touchdown. Bengals went 3-and-out punt on their second drive. Then this is where the Ravens fumbled after their third play, and this was a strange play by Lamar Jackson, where he was coming into this game. Lamar Jackson was not going to be healthy. As I mentioned in the preview episode, watching Lamar Jackson last Sunday play against the Jets, he didn't look like the Lamar Jackson that we're used to seeing when he's at 100% of his athletic, health. Last season, he was running around everybody and pulling off all kinds of incredible, electrifying moves with his speed. But this season, he's been having so many injuries, including it's hard to tell which one is bothering him the most, but he's got a hamstring that kept him out for multiple weeks, the knee, ankle, toe, and I'm not even sure if it's on different legs or the same leg has all these 4 injuries or what's going on. What it's obvious that it's affecting Lamar somewhat, but there were some plays where Lamar was able to pick up yardage with his feet and make things happen. Like on third down, he would scramble outside the pocket. Not every play. And so it was just an awkward game for Lamar. Maybe one of the worst games I've seen Lamar play. And I've watched a lot of Lamar games. And the Bengals were doing a good job of putting Lamar under pressure defensively. They were blitzing a lot. Al Golden has discovered the blitz package on his little napkin that he calls the defensive plays with. And they put Jalen Davis into the lineup off the practice squad. He's been playing again. And they've been moving Geno Stone up closer to the line of scrimmage and blitzing. Jordan Battle's been closer to the line of scrimmage a little bit. So they've kind of been changing up the way they've been playing defense. And with great effects, Lamar Jackson couldn't figure out who to go to when he was getting blitz off the edge. He couldn't find his hot receiver, and he wasn't making the throws that you would expect him to make. Like, there were a lot of throws by Lamar Jackson that were just way off, uncatchable for his receivers. He was missing guys deep, especially on the deep passes. Lamar tends to have an issue where he doesn't put enough air under his deep passes, and he kind of throws these line drive bullet passes down the field that are very difficult to complete if you're not completely accurate. And so there were a number of plays like that where he was missing guys, overthrowing receivers, throwing the ball like 10 feet over his receivers' heads, or skipping it at their feet, throwing it too far in front, too far behind. It was just not a very good night for Lamar Jackson in general. But also in this first quarter, he was trying to scramble around, make something happen, and was running around with only one hand on the ball. Joseph Isiah got some pressure on him, got credit for a sack, but the ball just kind of popped up into the air. Joseph Isiah came in and kind of hit Lamar Jackson in that one hand he was carrying the ball in. Ball flew up in the air. Cedric Johnson was right there to recover the fumble inside the 5-yard line for the Bengals. But on those 4 plays, Bengals gained 0 yards, gave the ball right back to the Ravens inside their 5-yard line, who didn't end up doing anything with it, but they were able to kick a punt right after that that got the ball out of their own territory back into the Bengals territory. After that, the Ravens are still up 7-3. They get the ball, or the Bengals get the ball. They drive 11 plays, 29 yards. Again, they have to settle for a field goal. 7-6 Ravens in the second quarter. Ravens get the ball back, and they commit their second fumble, lose their second fumble of the game. This time, this one was on a play that looked like it was going to be a Ravens touchdown that would have put them up 14-6. But unfortunately for the Ravens and Isiah Likely, he caught the pass over the middle, ran, I forget who it was he jumped over and broke a tackle of, but Isiah Likely was running into the end zone. He was at the 1-yard line, and Jordan Battle came up from behind, trailing behind, jumped over somebody else at the goal line, dove out and managed to swat the ball out of Isiah Likely's hands just at the last second to make him fumble out of the back of the end zone. And this is one of those rules that doesn't come up very frequently, but once you see it, especially if it happens to you, you'll probably never forget it. But as the offensive player, if you fumble the ball through the end zone, the ball is turned over like a turnover to the other team, which is kind of a weird rule because if you fumble it out of bounds, you retain possession and you just take over where the ball went out of bounds. It's no big deal if you fumble out of bounds. not an issue. But in that one situation where the player fumbles the ball from out of the end zone, like within the field of play, through the back of the end zone or out of bounds, it goes over to the other team. So remarkably huge swing of events where it looked like the Ravens were going to take an 8-point lead. Instead, Cincinnati takes over and they drive 11 plays, 74 yards all the way down the field for another field goal to go up 9-7. So even though the Bengals still haven't converted any touchdowns in any of these drives, they're taking the lead over the Ravens and prevented the Ravens from getting in with that second touchdown. This is where the defense digs in. They force another punt out of the Ravens, some more incomplete passes by Lamar. And this was a part of the game where the Ravens weren't utilizing Derrick Henry as the running back. They had taken him out of the game for a huge portion of the first half. After that first drive, Derrick Henry only touched the ball 2 times, I think, in the second half, or in the second quarter. After the game, the reporters were, hindsight's always 20/20, so the reporters were asking, well, how come you didn't give it to Derrick Henry more? And it's like, yeah, well, we probably should have done that if we would have known Lamar was going to play so badly. But Ravens and Bengals exchanged a couple punts. Ravens got the ball with 36 seconds left to go. And this is another situation where Lamar Jackson, he went back to pass and he tried to pump fake. Like he changed his mind at the last second about whether he was going to throw it or not. The ball just slipped out of his hands as his arm was going forward. They ruled it was a fumble and not an incomplete pass. It was a close call, but I think the rules analyst said, like, once you get past perpendicular with the ball, then you're not going to try to throw it with the ball like straight up and down. So you were trying to bring it back in, and then the ball just came out. But tough break for the Ravens. Again, the Bengals aren't able to turn that into a touchdown. They took over at the Ravens 19 with 28 seconds left, threw a bunch of incomplete passes, weren't able to do anything, had to settle for another field goal to go up 12-7. That was the Bengals' 4th field goal of that first half, and the Ravens' 3rd turnover. So at halftime, it was kind of a mixed feeling because the Bengals were up by 5, 12-7, but they hadn't scored any touchdowns yet, and they hadn't been able to convert in the red zone. They just had the 4 field goals. It felt like the Ravens were just going to inevitably wake up. Lamar was going to break out of whatever funk he was in. He was going to start hitting some of those passes that he had been missing in the first half, and it just felt inevitable that the Ravens were going to win this game. And Joe Burrow wasn't playing. I mean, he wasn't playing poorly, but his numbers, especially in the first half, weren't very great. I think he was down around 50% or maybe even less than 50%. I could check the statistics real quick here. All right, in the first half, Joe Burrow was 15 of 32 passing, just under 47%. He had taken 1 sack for 7 yards, threw for 165 yards, long of 43, on an amazing over-the-shoulder catch to Jamar Chase, where Jamar perfectly got separation from the defender by kind of giving him a little bit of a chicken wing push off at the last second, but he didn't extend his hand out. He kind of gave him a forearm wrist extension, but in contrast to Zay Flowers for the Ravens, who scored what looked like was going to be another Ravens touchdown. I think it was in the second or third quarter, but it got called back because of offensive pass interference. A very similar play to the one Jamar Chase caught on his long catch, but the difference was Zay Flowers made it a little bit more obvious than Jamar, and instead of Jamar giving it more of a forearm wrist push off, Zay Flowers actually used his hand and reached out and pushed off on DJ Turner to give himself a little bit more separation. So just that little extra bit of subtlety is what makes Jamar Chase the best receiver in the league. And Zay Flowers, a one-time Pro Bowler, but he may not be, obviously won't be getting as many as Jamar. But Bengals defense came out ready to play to start the second half. They forced a 3-and-out punt from the Ravens. Bengals respond with a long 10-play, 61-yard drive, capped off by an amazing one-handed catch by Tanner Hudson, going up against Kyle Hamilton, Pro Bowl All-Pro safety number 14 for the Ravens. Tanner Hudson made a left-handed one-handed catch going out of the back of the end zone to put the Bengals up on top 19-17, 12-point lead at that point with right around 7.5 minutes left to go in the third quarter. Ravens respond with their own 7-play, 68-yard drive. This was a couple of passes to Mark Andrews to get the drive going, but then Keaton Mitchell on the toss around right end. Zay Flowers had a pancake block on Jalen Davis on the outside. Jordan Battle wasn't able to get over to the corner in time. 18-yard touchdown run for Keaton Mitchell brought the score back to 19-14, back to a 5-point lead for the Bengals. But all of a sudden, Bengals learned how to score touchdowns only in this third quarter. The third quarter was the only time the Bengals were able to score any touchdowns. They got 2 of them. This time, 8-play, 68-yard drive. The biggest play on this one was the touchdown, 29-yard pass over the middle, deep over the middle to Andre Iosivas, number 80, right as he was crossing the goal line. That was actually Andre Iosivas' only catch of the game, but it was a good one to put the Bengals up on top, 26-14 at that point. Going into the fourth quarter, the Ravens got the ball, got a little bit of yardage down into, I think it was down into the red zone. They got the ball all the way down to the Bengals' 15-yard line. The biggest play was a 44-yard catch and run by Derrick Henry, just a toss out of the backfield. He was able to get away from the defenders, but the biggest, the reason why Derrick Henry didn't get even more yardage, he got it all the way down to the Bengals 31, but Myles Murphy caught Derrick Henry. Now, Derrick Henry is kind of running sideways and getting away from people, but still, Myles Murphy was the one who got all the way from his defensive end position 44 yards down the field to tackle Derrick Henry. So great effort by Myles Murphy. Myles had another big play at the end of this drive where Myles Murphy came in on the pressure on Lamar Jackson and was able to put his hand up and block Lamar, kind of tip the ball and get his hand on Lamar's throwing arm while he was trying to throw it. Ball got tipped up short, and Demetrius Knight, the linebacker, was there, able to pick off the pass, return it 39 yards all the way to the Bengals' 47-yard line, basically all the way out to midfield. So it looked like the Ravens were going to go and get at least within a one-score lead. At that point, it was 26-14. If the Ravens had scored a touchdown, it would have been back to a 5-point lead for the Bengals. But now Bengals got that turnover. They got the ball at midfield. They were able to get another field goal after a short drive to make it 29-14. Ravens got the ball, but they weren't able to really move it at all. They turned it over on downs. Weren't able to convert on fourth down. So you can kind of, I guess that cancels the earlier drive. The Bengals weren't able to convert on fourth down, but turnover on downs. At this point, Bengals have a 15-point lead with about 8 minutes left to go in the game. Unfortunately, they're driving. They pick up a couple first downs. Joe Burrow was audibly telling the center, Ted Karras, just take your time. We got plenty of time. let as much time go off the clock as possible. Maybe the Bengals got a little bit too relaxed because Samaje Perine got hit in the backfield as he was taking the handoff from Joe Burrow on 3rd and 6 at the Baltimore 12-yard line. He got stripped and ended up fumbling the ball and recovered by the Ravens. And so that made the turnover margin 4-1 at that point. Ravens had already committed 4 turnovers. The one thing you couldn't possibly do was turn it over to the Ravens at that point, but that's just what the Bengals did. With 5 minutes left in the go in the game, Ravens are down by 15 points with the ball at their own 12-yard line. So it's like, okay, we've seen this with the Jets game. You know, the Jets came back by 15. The Bengals did that to the Bears with the onside kick, but then they lost to the Bears anyway. So it's like, okay, we've seen this so many times. These teams score like 2 touchdowns right at the end of the game. Here's how the Bengals lose it, of course. But 5 plays later, Zay Flowers caught the pass from Lamar Jackson, but was immediately stripped by DJ Turner and Jalen Davis. And Barrett Carter was coming in there too on the tackle, but it was recovered by DJ Turner, I should say. So the 5th turnover by the Ravens, Bengals convert this one into their 6th field goal of the night to go up 32-14. That was the end of the game. For some reason, they left Lamar Jackson in, even though they're down by 18 with 1 minute left to go, but he was just handing off. I guess they didn't want to just take a knee, even though they were going to lose. But at that point, the Ravens stadium was completely empty, and a lot of the Ravens fans had left by 5 minutes left to go in the game when the Ravens were committed like their 4th turnover. So not too dissimilar from a lot of Bengals fans. And the thing that was weird about this game was it didn't seem very exciting watching it, mostly because the home team was the one that was losing and committing all these turnovers. So the crowd wasn't cheering. There was barely any cheering. The Bengals took the Ravens crowd out of the game almost from the beginning. And you just heard a lot of groans, and they weren't like booing loudly because the Ravens, they still have a winning record. They had won 5 games in a row. So people were still ready to cheer, and they probably figured, the Bengals have lost 4 games in a row. At some point, we're going to turn this around, and they wanted to support the team, but there was just no energy, and you could kind of sense that watching it on television. There wasn't a lot of energy and excitement in the stadium, so that kind of took some of the excitement out of the broadcast. Not to mention, Jason Garrett isn't the most exciting analyst I've ever heard. A lot of the interactions between Mike Tirico and Jason Garrett seem like overly manufactured and, oh, aren't we buddies? And I'm going to tell this great story I had about John Madden from 20 years ago or whatever. Ha ha ha. But it just all seemed very forced and stiff, and it just didn't really add to the viewing experience. On top of the fact that Lamar wasn't playing very well, the Ravens weren't playing very well, the home crowd wasn't into it, and like I said, Joe Burrow, it was great to have Joe Burrow back, but if we actually look at the statistics for him, he played okay. He ended up 24 of 46 passing, 261 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. A decent game, but even he would have to admit there were some passes that he missed early on, especially there wasn't much of a connection between Burrow and Mitch Tinsley. If we look at receiving, Mitch Tinsley had 9 targets, but he only had 2 catches for 22 yards, no touchdowns. Jamar had 7 catches on 14 targets, 110 yards, again, no touchdowns, long of 43. So for the top 2 targets for Joe Burrow, he wasn't especially efficient. Some of these were just kind of throwaway passes that didn't have a chance to be completed, but some of them were close but just weren't able to be caught. There was kind of a little bit of a miscommunication between Burrow and Mitch Tinsley, where Tinsley didn't run 100% of the route because he didn't know that Burrow was throwing it to him, and then it was kind of one of those things where it's too late to speed up, and the ball was already overthrown at that point. But Burrow was spreading the ball around to all his different targets. Mike Gesicki had 2 catches on 4 targets. Chase Brown was actually 7 for 7 for 35 yards, but long of 9. Chase Brown wasn't able to break out. Like I said, Andre Iosivas, 1 catch on 2 targets. Samaje Perine, 2 catches on 2 targets. Tanner Hudson, 1 catch for 14 yards, but it was a touchdown. They keep throwing it to Drew Sample for some reason. He had 1 catch on 2 targets. Noah Fant, 1 catch for 3 yards on 2 targets. But a lot of different receivers were targeted. And Chase Brown also had 78 yards on 15 carries, long of 18, average of 5.2 per carry. So if we add those two together, Chase Brown had a combined 113 yards total between receiving and rushing. Mostly efficient, but not a prolific offensive performance by the Bengals by any means. It was mostly the fact that just if you look at time of possession, this was the biggest. If you couldn't tell by the turnovers, the time of possession would definitely do it. Bengals possessed the ball for 38 minutes, 45 seconds. Ravens had it for 21 minutes, 15 seconds. That's, if I do a little math in my head, Bengals had the advantage of 17 and a half minutes. So over a full quarter of play, the Bengals possessed it more than the Ravens. And that's crazy just because if you think about, it's not the same, obviously, football and basketball are different sports, but that would be like if the one team on basketball, had it in their side of the court for 2/3 of the game, and the other team just didn't get any shots off. Well, of course, the team that had the ball at their end of the court and has all the shots on goal is going to be the team that wins. So it wasn't a surprise that the Bengals won this game when they had so many more possessions just based off of turnovers, the time of possession. The Ravens defense played relatively well. Like if I look at total yards gained, even with all those turnovers, the Bengals only outgained the Ravens by 40 yards. You would have thought it was like, if you look at the score, 32-14, you might think, oh, the Ravens just didn't show up to play. The Bengals had the Ravens' number for sure, but it was really just a case of turnovers. Like the Bengals, 6 field goals, most of the time in the NFL, not being able to convert inside the red zone. The Bengals were, if I go to the game, the Bengals were 1 for 6 inside the red zone. Ravens were 1 for 2. So if the Bengals had been 50% like the Ravens, they should have had, 3 for 6 inside the red zone. The Bengals basically should have had at least like 40 or more points in this game. The fact that they only had 32 was kind of a disappointment. So you can't expect to get 5 turnovers. That's, coming into this game, the Bengals defense had only forced 10 turnovers the previous 11 games. Then they had 5 in one game. That's going to be the outlier. You can't expect to have that many turnovers, but that's how you win games against teams that you're underdog to. That's one of the things I said in the preview. The Bengals, like I said, turnovers and special teams play would be probably the decider in this one. And the turnovers turned out to be definitely the difference. Bengals special teams also did a pretty good job. Punting was relatively even, but Evan McPherson with the 6 field goals, he's probably going to get AFC offense or special teams player of the week if you score 6 field goals. He had a couple long ones in there, so he's probably going to be player of the week for special teams in the AFC. Joseph Ossai also had 2 sacks in this game, including that forced fumble that the Bengals were able to recover. Jordan Battle led the team with 10 tackles, including 7 solo. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the unsung hero, one of the guys I mentioned last week as jumping back into the starting lineup, right guard Dalton Risner, number 66. He has been in and out of the lineup this season. He missed a couple weeks of practice and had to sit out the game due to some kind of an illness, but he had been playing when Joe Flacco was in there and looked pretty good. I think he was playing when they won the game against the Steelers. He was playing maybe a little bit better than the rookie, Jalen Rivers. And this is his second game starting in a row. He looked good last week, even though the Bengals didn't win. It was a pretty close game, and they were, whenever Risner's in there, they seem to do better at running the football, way better than Rivers. And that was a surprise in this game. Obviously, the Bengals had more plays to pick up more yards, but the Bengals outgained the Ravens running the ball, which is pretty uncommon in the Zach Taylor era. It's rare that the Bengals outgain anybody running the football, much less a team like the Ravens with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. So, shout out to Dalton Risner. Also, shout out to the referees who finally called a couple false start penalties on Orlando Brown. He's been jumping false starting before the snap like every game this season, and they finally called it. And so he knows, because you can see it's so obvious when he doesn't false start. He is like half a second later than when he's normally jumping. So the referees were all over the motion. Some of these false starts that they're calling this year are like so slight, but the ones Orlando Brown was getting called on were like super obvious. But just to summarize this game, this was an unusual game because it's Thursday night, it's on a short week, it's a holiday, divisional game, weird things can happen. So I don't want to take this as this is who this Bengals team really is, because, everybody is going to say, oh, they were just, the only problem was Joe Burrow wasn't playing. Now that they have Joe Burrow back, everything's fixed. They're going to be good now. They're going to win every game. Joe Flacco could have done just as good, I think. Maybe not just as good, but if the Bengals defense had played the way that they played against the Ravens on Thursday night, forced 5 turnovers, everything was the same, Joe Flacco still would have won the game. Maybe it wouldn't have been quite as fun. It would have been weird to watch Joe Flacco out there in front of national TV, like eating turkey after the game and being in a Bengals uniform in Baltimore. That would have been strange to watch. So it was more pleasing to the eye to see Joe Burrow go out and do it. And it's a great story that everybody gets to tell of, oh, Joe Burrow fought through all the adversity to come back for the team. Now, all of that will be evaporated if next week they go out and lose and Joe Burrow gets hurt again. But we just have to live in the moment, appreciate this one game, this one win for what it is. Because, it's, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it's just like, in Peanuts and Charlie Brown, where Lucy, she sets the football up. She's like, oh, Charlie Brown, go ahead, kick the field goal. And every time she pulls it out the last second and Charlie Brown goes flipping onto his back. That's what it feels like, is the Bengals are like, oh, see, we're 4-8. All we got to do is win all the rest of the games and we'll get into the playoffs. We still have a chance. It's like, how many times, how many years in a row are they going to keep doing this same story of lose a bunch of the games in the beginning and then, oh, here we come, we're going to win all the games at the end? It's like they can't do this every year without fail. They've got to do something different. Eventually, the tide has to swing back in the other way, and they have to lose some of these games at the end. I can't do this again. It can't be every year they lose every game up until they're almost mathematically eliminated and then win out. That can't be how this team plans it. Like, I know Zach Taylor is going to say everything is right on schedule. This is exactly what they wanted to be. They know how to get out of this hole they dug for themselves because they've done it before every other year. Here we go. I know that's what's coming. I know it. It's going to be 10 more days until they play the Bills in Buffalo. We're going to have to hear about that whole narrative about this is exactly where they wanted to be. 4-8. They got 5 games left. The season could go either way. But like I said, what I would love to see, of course, would be for them to win out. I want them to win every game. What I don't want is them to win 3 or 4 of the games so that they just barely don't get into the playoffs. And all of this was for nothing. I guess it'll be fun. I don't know. I'm so torn on this because you don't want to think ahead to the draft, but that's the reality is the worse you do in the regular season, the better your draft picks are. So if you're not going to be number 1 winning the Super Bowl, you want to be absolutely terrible. Although looking at the Tennessee Titans, you don't want to be too bad. They got Cam Ward at number 1 overall, and right now they're going to be picking number 1 overall for the second year in a row, which you never want to do. But that's what happens when you hire guys who used to work for Zach Taylor as your head coach. So we will see what this coaching staff is able to do on the long week. They'll have extra rest to get Joe Burrow ready to go for game 2. And hopefully Joe Burrow is ready to go. That's the other thing that's you kind of take for granted, that all these players, just because they go out there and play on the same field or wearing the same uniforms, that they're all like the same health. After playing in their 12th game of the season, a lot of these defensive players who are trying to run around and chase Joe Burrow are more fatigued and hurt, and he's still got fresh legs. It's weird how he's got fresh legs even though he's got that injured toe, but outside of the toe, his body's perfectly fine. So he still hasn't accumulated all these hits and injuries and little bruises and strains and sprains that he would have throughout the rest of the season. So maybe it's like a blessing in disguise. He'll be that much, healthier going into the end of the season, if you want to think of it that way. So there's always a silver lining. But we'll see. I don't know. I got a weird feeling about this season. It could go either way. We'll see. Hopefully it's fun. But I don't know how long I'm going to live if I have to keep watching Bengals seasons like this. They might just kill me eventually. So hopefully they win a Super Bowl before I'm dead. That's what you want as a fan. The last thing you want is your team to be oh my God, think about being a Browns fan for your entire life. Yikes. So at least we got that going for us, not being Browns fans. So on that note, I'll be back. Maybe I'll recap some of the games that happened this Sunday. Maybe something interesting will happen in the AFC North with the Browns or the Steelers, and we'll be able to talk about that, see where the Bengals finish up in the rankings. But until the next episode, I'm going to leave you with a hoo-day and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.